thanks to North Anderson Community Church for hosting our in-person event tonight. Thank you to Laura Robinson for manning our Zoom room. And again, thank you for all who have attended. A little reminder that we are having a double feature and the show continues tomorrow afternoon. Dr. Fia will be doing 2 additional presentations at 2 p.m. in the Benson room of the Bleckley Inn in downtown Anderson. And we also have a Zoom option for that as well. So again, you can register for those if you're going to watch it on Zoom at our website. But tonight, what we have with Dr. John Fia, the presentation tonight is the Evangelical Road to Donald Trump. So I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. John Fia, who is a distinguished professor of American history at Messiah University in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. And he is the author of this book, Was America Founded as a Christian Nation? A Historical Introduction. And it was one of 3 finalists for the George Washington Book Prize, one of the largest literary prizes in the United States. It was also selected as the Forward Review's IndieFan Religious Book of the Year. Did I get that right? Okay. John is also the co-editor of Confessing History, Explorations in Christian Faith and the Historian's Vocation, and a finalist for the Lilly Fellows Program in Arts and Humanities Book Award. His other books include Why Study History, The Bible Cause, A History of American Bible Society, and Believe Me, The Evangelical Road to Donald Trump. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. John Fia.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Good to be here. I got in. How am I sounding, by the way? Can you hear? Can the Zoom hear me? We're good. Got in this afternoon. Thanks to Stephen Morgan for making sure I got here okay and making sure that everything went well. I will be here, like it was said, tomorrow as well, tomorrow afternoon. I am not sure I am a progressive. You can decide that. I think that's after I'm done, you can decide whether you want to invite me back. I definitely know I am not a theologian. I am an American historian by training and by teaching. So we'll see how this goes. And over the next 3 days, I think there'll be a lot of common ground that we can find. In terms of the subject matter that I want to talk about. Just to give you a heads up, and maybe people on Zoom who might want to come back on Sunday, tomorrow afternoon, I want to address this whole question of was America founded as a Christian nation? And again, some of you, I know some of you that looked at your list of speakers. This Christian nationalism seems to be a popular topic. You've had some speakers on that subject. I'm going to kind of come at the question of was America founded as a Christian nation in the first lecture tomorrow from a historian's point of view. Right? What did the founding fathers believe about the relationship between religion and politics, church and state, and so forth. And then in the second lecture, I want to talk about how those on the Christian right actually use American history and whether they do so responsibly or not to advance a certain kind of political and cultural agenda in the present. So again, you're stuck with a historian for these 3 days. I can dabble in theology. I admit I'm an amateur, but I'm happy to take any questions you have, whether they be historical or not. So again, thank you for the invite. I was told that this is Atlanta Braves country. I don't know what the Braves score was today, but I just want to let you know I'm a diehard Mets fan, so the Mets won today. So they're still at least 2 games ahead of the Braves, and I apologize for that if I've already alienated half the audience. Anyway, born and raised in New Jersey, lived 20 years in Pennsylvania. So let's dig in today. The Evangelical Road to Donald Trump is the subtitle of the book I published in 2018. It was actually one of the first books to kind of wrestle with. The book is now almost 7 years old. but it was one of the first books, I think, out there to kind of wrestle with the statistics, I think alarming statistics, that in the 2016 election, 81%, and you've probably all heard these statistics by now, 81% of white evangelical Christians voted for Donald Trump. Now, I think I did have to say by this point the name Donald Trump without going into all the various ways in which Christians might not find him an appealing candidate. So I'm not going to go into that, but by just simply saying now at this point that 81% voted for for Donald Trump, 81% of evangelicals, I think that should raise red flags without me telling you who Donald Trump is or talk about his character. 2020, another roughly 80 to 82% of American white evangelicals voted for Trump. And I actually, the other day I was looking up some statistics, and despite all of these movements, evangelicals for Harris and these sorts of things, it's still roughly, a Pew poll just came out, and still roughly about 80 to 81% of Americans plan to vote, white evangelicals, I should say, plan to vote for Donald Trump in the coming election in November. In 2016, I have the school I teach at, Messiah University, comes out of the Anabaptist tradition, Brethren, Mennonite. Some of you might be familiar with those denominations. But we do have a lot of evangelical students who attend the college. I don't think I've met a faculty member who voted for Trump, or over 200 faculty. But we do have students. It's a rather politically mixed, like any campus, I guess, a pretty politically mixed group. But they are Christians, and many of them identify as evangelical Christians. So in 2016, when the exit polls came out, and I realized that 81% of white evangelicals pulled the lever for Trump, I was at first shocked. Right. At first, I was like, how is this possible? I mean, I saw it coming, right? I have been chronicling the Trump campaign. I've been writing about it, doing op-eds and stuff about it. But the 81% struck me. And then after a couple more days, I began to think more deeply about it. I took off my kind of American citizen, I can't believe Trump got elected hat, and put on my historian's hat. And I said, something? How did I miss this, right? As an American historian, trained as an American religious historian and an early American historian, how did I miss this? It was all right there in front of me. And it was that motivated me then to sit down and to start writing and trying to put this kind of evangelical embrace of Donald Trump into some kind of historical context. If I had one regret about the book, it's that much of it was written probably without a healthy detachment from the moment. So at times it's that's not good for a historian, right? To write without a healthy detachment from the moment. It was like during September 11th, I remember I was teaching at Valparaiso University, a Lutheran school in Indiana. And, I remember walking into the classroom and my students going, so what's the historical significance of this day? And I said, I have no idea. Ask me in 20 years, right? I'm a historian. That's how we think. So I didn't have the kind of attachment. If I would make any corrections, I would probably say that 81% number is a little more complicated than, say, many would like to make it out to be, at least the critics of Trump. I think there is a significant for lack of a better term, MAGA element within white evangelicalism. In other words, these are the people who go to the Trump rallies and wear the red hats and, are rah-rah for Trump. There were a lot of other evangelicals who couldn't stand Trump, but they hated Hillary or Joe Biden, or in this case, Harris, even more. So there's some nuance there. But on the other hand, they still pulled the lever. So anything that has come from the Trump administration that has hurt American democracy, I think there are 81% of white evangelicals helped to make that happen, no matter what their motives. right? But historians are always interested in complexity and nuance of the past. It's never so clean cut as, as people like to make it out to be. So I just throw that little caveat out there. Again, the book's almost 7 years old. So what happened to the Christian witness of American evangelicals is what I want to get into here. And was there ever really anything different between the history of American evangelical political and social engagement and the 81% who voted for Trump? Has anything changed over the years? And what I found is that evangelicals in American history are pretty complex when it comes to social and cultural issues. And I'll come back to that point in a second, but I just want you to remember that. But in the end, I concluded that the reason why so many white evangelicals, and these are the 3 points I want to kind of unpack today with you in this talk. I concluded that white evangelicals were motivated to vote for Donald Trump for 3 reasons. One, they embraced a politics of fear, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Number 2, they embraced a politics of power, again, which I'll come back to. And then third, a politics of nostalgia. And I want to, again, unpack those 3 things. I'm not going to do this tonight for lack of time, but I think I could also put it this way and juxtapose those 3 categories with sort of more hopeful categories, right? So the opposite of a politics of fear, and this is what I talk about in the book, is a politics of hope. The opposite of a politics of power is a politics of humility. And the opposite of a politics of nostalgia is a politics rooted in good American history. So hope, humility, history there, but that's the side, the side that is not really historical in nature. That's me being prescriptive about what needs to happen in the evangelical community. And again, I have ties to that community simply because of the place where I teach and the students that I teach. So let's talk first about the politics of fear. And this gets to the point I wanted to make about nuance and complexity. At almost every, and now I'm going to make a general statement after I talk about complexity, right? But at almost every moment in American history, when we see a profound movement towards change, whether it be a demographic change in the culture or whether it be some kind of political change, there is always a significant portion of white American evangelicals who engage in what I call the politics of fear. Now, again, I'm a historian, so let me give you a few examples of this. And I trace this politics of fear deep into the American past. Usually people chuckle when I say I'm going to start off with the election of 1800. Right? And what is that thing? But you see this very, actually in the book, I go further back, even to the Salem witch trials. I take this all the way back to this evangelical politics of fear. But election of 1800, again, very briefly, Thomas Jefferson running against John Adams. John Adams, a good Federalist, has much of his support from New York and New England among middle-class Christians. We might call them even evangelical Christians. Today, Thomas Jefferson, has much of his support in the South, but they run for president, and you see the Federalists, the supporters of John Adams, engaging very, very early in the campaign, these Christians in this politics of fear. Thomas Jefferson was not a traditional Orthodox, as they would have defined it at the time, Christian. He did not believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He did not believe that the Bible was the inspired word of God, like evangelicals believe. He did not believe Jesus was God, right? And this created a great amount of almost hysteria in parts of the North. And you see examples here that Thomas Jefferson, if he gets elected, he's going to bring atheism into our country. right? He's going to undermine our Christian values and our Christian country. There's even one case where a New England minister said that if Thomas Jefferson gets elected, he is going to come into our churches and our homes and confiscate all of our Bibles. So again, this fear of Jefferson, right? Now I said complexity because there are also white evangelicals who voted for Thomas Jefferson, especially evangelicals living in the South, because they had lived so long under what they perceived to be a tyrannical Anglican establishment that would not allow them to have religious liberty. So Jefferson, of course, being the great champion of religious liberty, drew in a lot of these evangelical voters because they were the persecuted minority during the period, right? So again, it wasn't just a one-way street, but I do think, and I'm going to talk here a little bit here about a through line to Trump, right? Historians like to talk about the through line. I think the through line are all of those evangelical Baptists like John Leland and others in Virginia who voted for Thomas Jefferson. The through line to Trump for me is through those Federalists who lived in fear of a atheist or deist or whatever you want to call him president. Nevertheless, this cultivation of this politics of fear really defined much of Federalist politics. In the support of John Adams in the election of 1800. Fast forward, again, little history lessons here, right? Fast forward into the 19th century, and you have this massive evangelical awakening in the country. Notice the Second Great Awakening. Some of you may have heard of that. The Second Great Awakening translates into, as evangelicals become quote-unquote saved, right, or born again. Charles Finney, for example, was a minister who traveled around preaching the evangelical gospel, trying to get people saved. Much of that effort translated into evangelical Christians being at the forefront of some of the most important social movements in the 19th century. I'll name two here, and then I'm going to mention a third one here in a second. But women's rights, for example, evangelicals championed that in the early 19th century. Prison reform, I'll mention three. Temperance. Now, again, today we often look at the idea of temperance or the prevention or the curbing of the drinking of alcohol as a sort of fundamentalist, that's what fundamentalists do, right? No drinking and so forth. But, historically, in the early 19th century, the country had a serious alcohol problem. There's a great book by a historian named William Roeder called The Alcoholic Republic. So again, the idea of temperance was seen in the early 19th century before the Civil War as kind of a reform movement to help families, those workers who would go cash their paycheck and then, go straight to the bar, kind of thing. Again, complexity. Because even as evangelicals were championing these ideas, there's a through line, right? They were also at the forefront of much of the movement we associate with nativism today. Some of you may know your immigrant history. During the early 19th century, the country is being flooded with Irish Catholic and German Catholic immigrants at this time. And they're moving into American cities. They're coming in large numbers. And there becomes, again, politics of fear, a great sense of fear about what these Catholic immigrants are going to do to this Protestant nation that we serve as the guardians of, right? White evangelicals were at the forefront of this kind of nativism. And in fact, an entire political party in the early 19th century, known as the Know Nothing Party. Their whole purpose, their whole platform was to keep Irish and German Catholic, mostly Irish, out of the United States. Build a wall, maybe, so they can't come in. I mean, technically, we don't want to do that, but this is about Trump. So again, evangelicals were not only part of that nativist movement, but they led it in many ways, right? And again, much like the fear of Jefferson being elected, the fear of new immigrants coming into the country and threatening this Protestant nation that they want to create, at least the way evangelicals want to create at this time, is there. Let's fast forward even to the Civil War. Again, evangelicals are at the heart of the anti-slavery movement. Abolitionists, right? They're applying their evangelical faith to the issue of justice for for enslaved people. At the same time, in the South, some in the North. Again, we can't get too kind of complicated here, but you have evangelicals basically advancing the idea that, and I'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, advancing the idea that in order to establish America as a truly Christian biblical nation, we must obey the biblical teachings that slaves obey their masters. Right? There's a theological, evangelicals in the South construct an entire theological system around keeping the enslaved, and of course, this translates into post-Civil War Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and so forth. What evangelicals are the heart of that movement and advocating against it because that's their reading of the Bible, at least in the South. You can move into the early 20th century and look at the so-called fundamentalist modernist controversy. This was the battle over, whether or not, Orthodox Christianity as defined by the evangelicals would hold the day in American seminaries and universities, or would theology intersect with modern ideas like science, for example. Of course, the fundamentalists, in the midst, again, you need to understand, fundamentalism takes place in the midst of social and cultural change, right? New immigrants, a second wave of immigrants are coming in. I'm half Italian, half Slovakian, right? My people are coming in to Ellis Island at this time. Jews are coming into the country in the late 19th, early 20th century. Industrialization is taking place throughout the country. And a lot of things are shifting, right? And I think how do many evangelicals respond? They respond out of fear. We need to save the old Christian civilization. Things are changing too rapidly, right? Let's buckle down on which fundamentals of the faith that we believe are the true ways of understanding God, of understanding the Bible, of understanding Jesus, of understanding Christianity, right? And what results again out of this is a kind of a fear of change, I think, that takes place. So those are just some examples here of how the politics of fear has been a part. I don't want to say, there's some out there who are saying, I'm in a long-standing academic argument with people that, all evangelicals were, this as a historian, but all evangelicals were, white, racist, patriarchal, and it's hard to make that case from or at least we're concerned about social issues. It's sometimes hard to make that case from the historical record. But you could certainly make a case that there is a part of evangelicalism that Trump and the Christian right from the 70s and 80s on managed to tap into to be able to be effective, purveyors, if you will, of a politics of fear. And when you're afraid and when things are changing, right, you turn to the past, you turn to strong men, you turn to people who are going to, we'll talk about this in a second, make America great again, right, like it used to be, and thus resisting this kind of change. So that's a nice transition then into the second point that I want to make here. Evangelicals have embraced a politics of power. And here, I think the 1960s is the key. Most white evangelicals in the United States have not gotten over the 1960s. And in some ways, you can't understand their politics today without understanding the 1960s. And I don't mean there's the standard stuff, right? Like Vietnam protests and hippies and, civil rights movement and all these kinds of things. But actually, and so that's all true, right? They have some issues with those things. But I think what's even more pertinent to understand why the 60s was such and even into the 70s was such a crucial time for the development of a politics of power. You have to understand the way in which many conservative evangelicals, white evangelicals, understood what happened in the 1960s. So let me quick run through this litany of things, and one of the things I try to teach my students about doing history is history requires empathy, and that means you have to walk into the shoes of people who are different than you or who you disagree with to try to understand the world on their terms, even if you can't stand them. So I'm going to ask you to do an exercise here in empathy, right? Try to put yourself in the head of someone, your neighbor, someone who is a conservative, white conservative evangelical in the 1960s, okay? In 1962, the Supreme Court declared that prayer in public schools is no longer constitutional, mandatory prayer, right? In 1963, Bible reading, mandatory Bible reading, Abington v. Shemp is the case, is declared unconstitutional. Suddenly you're making an argument, which I still don't see how it's theologically possible if you believe in an active God, but anyways, God is taken out of the schools, right? How that works, I'm not sure, especially knowing something about the evangelical God. How do you take him out of a school? 1965, Congress passed the Hart-Celler Act, which is often known as the 1965 Immigration Act. By the early 70s, the resultant effects of the 1965 Immigration Act are starting to be put into effect. The 1965 Immigration Act allows, or for the first time, I should say, allows non-Western immigrants into the country in large numbers. In comes, obviously people from Asia, people from the Middle East, people who embrace other world religions other than Christianity, right? Muslims are coming into the country, right? All of this threat that comes from new immigration. In the late 1960s, you have the Supreme Court wrestling with segregation in white evangelical Christian academies, including one particular college right down the road from here, Bob Jones University. And it's there that the United States Supreme Court decides that any institution, and again, much of this, we always focus on Bob Jones because Bob Jones was the leading sort of defendant in the case. But there were also hundreds and hundreds of white K through 12 academies that would not allow students of color to come in. When the Supreme Court says if you do not desegregate, you're going to lose your tax exempt status. Well, Bob Jones, they decide to not. They decide, I think they've gotten it back now in recent years, but they decided to do, forget it. We're not going to have big government coming in and telling us how to live our lives, how to run our schools. This is the same argument that the Confederates made when the North came down, but we'll leave that to the side for now. But nevertheless, this is, I think, where the white evangelical community embraced capitalism, free markets, right? How dare government and small government, right? How dare the federal government come into my backyard and tell me that I have to desegregate against the way I read scripture? This is a religious liberty issue for them. You could disagree, again, we can disagree with you, but again, put yourself in their shoes. They're threatening their way of understanding the scriptures. Jimmy Carter, when Jimmy Carter actually supported the Supreme Court in that case, people like Jerry Falwell and the Christian right, said, forget it. You might say you're born again, but you're not one of us. And of course, in 1980, they turned toward Ronald Reagan. And then you move into the 70s. I don't have to say much, I'm guessing, about the way in which the Christian right responds to Roe versus Wade, right, as a threat to, I could. Very interesting about Roe versus Wade because the Southern Baptists actually supported Roe versus Wade when it first came out, based upon their Baptist principles, right? The idea that, Baptists don't like the government being in their face. So the Southern Baptists said, we don't want the government, telling women what to do with their bodies. That goes against Baptist principles. Of course, things have changed in the Southern Baptist Church, as probably you know better than me. Since then, since the conservative takeover. But nevertheless, here's another point of concern, right? And then, one overlooked point of concern is really 1976, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about this tomorrow. But 1976 is the bicentennial, right? American history is in the air, right? People are thinking about the founding fathers wherever you turn, right? The 200th anniversary of the country. And many, I should say, the bicentennial opens the door, I think, for many people like Jerry Falwell and others to start crafting an alternative view, if you will, of American history that puts evangelical Christians at the center, right? So again, I'll say more about that on tomorrow afternoon. But all of these things, I think it's a perfect storm, right? The society is changing. What happened to our Christian nation, right? And how then should we respond? Well, if you do have these legitimate concerns about culture and about the decline of culture, and you don't like, let's try to find an example here that you might find common ground with the Christian right. Like maybe you don't like pornography, or you do think there's too much violence on television, right? If you believe that, you probably share that with Jerry Falwell and the Christian right? But if you believe those things, there were all kinds, and you were an evangelical, there were all kinds of alternative ways of thinking about how to deal with those questions that were available to people at the time. But instead, the Christian right believed that the only way of addressing these questions was through the ballot box, and by electing the right people who would elect the right Supreme Court justices, who would elect the right senators, who would nominate the right Supreme Court justices, make sure that one of us is the president, right? And you build then an entire political philosophy around the idea of we must win and must gain power. And as a result, there's this great power struggle then that exists between the Christian right and those on the left. Many, by the way, who also are trying to respond with power too. Let's not kid ourselves. Right? They want control too. But again, maybe I can talk about some of the other options that were available at the time. I'm actually writing a book right now about the George W. Bush era, and it's called "The Roads Not Taken." The working title, right? It's really a book about kind of what might have happened if evangelicals, even, again, whatever you think about this, what might have happened if evangelicals, at least the Christian right, got on board with some of Bush's kind of compassionate conservatism, at least his domestic policies. I probably, with a lot of you, when I say his foreign policy was an absolute disaster. But again, I'm just a historian here. I'm not supposed to give my opinions. So politics of fear, politics of power. Again, I'm trying to unpack these ideas historically. And then finally, politics of nostalgia, right? My wife tells me, we've been married for 30 years, last August. She tells me I am the most nostalgic person she's ever met. I could sit there and be moved to tears by, family picnics from like 1973, movies, films, those are just, and I always hate watching them with my mother because I'm like, oh, look at that, there I am, I'm wearing, shorts, running around, blah, blah, blah. And then, my mom will be, oh yeah, there's Uncle Marty, that's right before he got cancer, or oh, there's Mary, that's must have been right before they got divorced. Yeah, like shut up, huh? You're ruining my happy memories here at this moment, right? So honestly, I don't necessarily think nostalgia is a bad thing. I do believe, though, that building a political philosophy around nostalgia is quite dangerous. Right, and I think that's what the Make America Great Again movement has done. I'm a historian, so when I see the phrase "Make America Great Again," I think a lot of Americans tend to focus on the word "great," right? I tend to focus on the word "again," right? You tell me when America was great, all right? And then as a historian, I'm happy to enter into that conversation and give you a full and complex view of the time period that you're talking about. You want to talk about the 1950s? Let's talk about the 1950s, right? Ultimately, nostalgia is an incredibly selfish, almost narcissistic way of understanding the past. Because nostalgia is about the warm and fuzzies, the good feelings, right, that you have. It's about you, wanting to go back to a time that was good for you, right? Or maybe you think it was good for you, right? My mother gives me a different story, right? Oh, this story's good for me, right? Nostalgia is not, the idea of nostalgia is not, people who are nostalgic are not equipped to be able to understand history where you want to see the full complexity of a particular era, right? So again, tell me, what is it, the 1950s? Let's talk about the 1950s. Was the 1950s really great for all Americans? And again, we can bring it up, the people that perhaps, it wasn't great for, minorities, the poor. Back to whatever date you want to go back to. And then let me enter in, or any historian enter in, and let's talk a little bit about complexity of that era, right? The nuances and so forth that we miss. So I think what evangelicals have bought into is, and again, I'll talk more about this tomorrow, is they bought into this idea that we were once a Christian nation, which, that's kind of a suspect claim to begin with historically, right? So, not only do they want to go back to the past, they want to go back to a past that probably never even existed in the first place, right? Let's go back to that era, and then let's build public policy around that backward look rather than looking forward. And I think white evangelicals are particularly susceptible of this because they have been taught by their leaders. And again, we can name the names. I mentioned Falwell. Let's talk about Pat Robertson. Let's talk about Franklin Graham. Let's talk about, the focus on the family, James Dobson, right? All of these people, they've been taught that it was better back then, and we just need to get back to it. And you know something? Those people I just mentioned, and those organizations I just mentioned, they don't get enough credit in American history. Now be careful. I'm a historian, right? And what I mean by that, when I say they don't get enough credit, in my textbook that I used to teach the United States survey class to freshmen, there's maybe like 1 or 2 paragraphs about Falwell and the Christian right. There should be a whole chapter about Falwell and the Christian right, because Falwell and the Christian right taught millions and millions of white evangelicals that there was only one way to do politics. And that way of doing politics, driven by a politics of fear, driven by a politics of power, driven by a politics of nostalgia, led evangelicals right into the arms of this reality television star, Donald Trump. We need a politics of rooted in good history, right? Not nostalgia. And there's a difference between the two, because good history, I love, I'm going to get it wrong, so I'm actually going to...
It's on the floor.
Oh, did they fall off?
This direction.
Oh, here we go. I just bought these too. I almost stepped on. I wrote this quote and now I'm going to end with a quote by a theologian after talking about how I'm a historian. Jürgen Moltmann, the great theologian of hope, right? Says, I love this quote because it's so applicable to what I do as a historian as well. Historians awaken the dead and piece together that which is broken, right? That's what historians do. They go into the past in all its fullness, its complexity, its brokenness, and they try to tell a story that not only honors and respects the past, but then builds cultural agendas around those things that are repair that we need to repair in the past. So again, go get the book if you want to. No one's buying it anymore because it's now 7 years old and there's about 20 other books on Trump out there. But I unpack these arguments even more fully in the book. But I think I'll stop there. I don't know how long I've gone and take some questions.
I have one for you.
I think she wants to get the mic. Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna run with them.
Because the Zoom people need to hear.
I can't remember the PhD sociologist who wrote the book Evangelicals.
Say that again, the first
The
one.
PhD sociologist who wrote the book The Evangelicals.
James Davison Hunter.
Yes.
Yeah.
She mentions a very interesting.
Unless it's a he, but you might be thinking of something else.
Yeah, I might be thinking of something else. It's a London author, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But she was mentioning.
Francis Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fitzgerald. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
She mentions that, and I'm wondering from a historical perspective how you tease out the power piece. But she said that Jerry Falwell was more interested in the appearance of being in the White House with Ronald Reagan than influencing the political policies of Ronald Reagan. Falwell was an anti-intellectual in so many ways, with Ivy League schools and everything else. But that whole idea of power, and she makes the point that he just wanted to be seen as a person of power.
I'd like to answer it one way, but I know that argument that Fitzgerald made. I'm not sure how she could read Jerry Falwell's mind, but everything points to that. I think it's a fair historical assessment. And that gets to this point of power in the book, my book, believe me, the Evangelical Road to Donald Trump. I do trace this idea. I call it court evangelicalism. And what I mean by court evangelicalism is I draw upon the Renaissance era courtiers. These were men who came to the king's court to flatter him, to be seen with the king, right? And I use this to describe those evangelical ministers who you all seen the shots with them praying with Trump and trying to get a photo op and all this kind of stuff. But I not only coined that term, but I also unpack that idea historically. Falwell certainly would fit that with Reagan. I just listened to the full tape. You can get it, do it online. You can listen to it online. I happen to point you there, of Billy Graham in Nixon's White House after the 1972 National Prayer Breakfast, in which both of them spoke. Billy Graham is in there not to spiritually counsel Nixon, not even for a photo op. He's kind of snuck in, but he was a political operative. He literally was asking Richard Nixon, "Where do you want me to go to speak?" Richard Nixon's like, "I'm weak in Pennsylvania," and Graham says, "I will be happy to schedule more speaking engagements in Pennsylvania, not big crusades, but just speaking engagements." There's one point where Billy Graham says to Richard Nixon, I'm paraphrasing here. He says something to the effect of, "If it gets close." Now, of course, it wasn't close at all. I mean, he blew out the government in that election, right? Maybe Watergate had something to do with it. I don't know. But if it gets close, Graham says to Nixon, it's all on tape. I will be willing to come out and endorse you and say, and tell my evangelical followers to vote for you, even if it hurts my ministry. I'm 58 years, this is an exact quote, I'm 58 years old and I don't care. You know, I mean, I read that to a family member who's a big Billy Graham person, an uncle in his 80s who just was, in tears about, I didn't know this, right? Falwell did this, whatever you want to say about Bush's faith-based initiatives and compassionate conservatism, there were a lot of really well-meaning evangelicals running the shop, the faith-based initiative, compassionate conservative shop, who wanted to help the poor. And Karl Rove, who was Bush's top political advisor, basically just said, I don't care what you do, just get me a blanket faith bill, right? They could care less about, when you get close to political power, you get burned, right? If you care about the witness of, say, the gospel, or however you want to define it, not only are these people psychophantic, but they're also hurting, their own kind of Christian testimony by doing this. Although, I don't know, just with Trump, it doesn't seem to bother anybody. So yeah, I think there's a long history of this kind of, court evangelicalism. Of course, there's the old Baptist saying. Tony, one of my kind of inspirations for kind of social justice issues, Tony Campolo, I don't know if that name rings a bell, an evangelical activist. He used to always quote, when you mix ice cream and horse manure, the ice cream is ruined forever, but the horse manure just stays the same. It's actually the other way around. The horse manure, the horse manure stays the same. The ice cream is ruined forever, right? That religion and politics, kind of thing. But again, let's not also, just to be fair, let's not pretend that like those on the evangelical left, I don't know how familiar you are, but people like Jim Wallace and Sojourners and, these people, I think they're driven just as much by power as the right, except they just have a different set of agendas. I think there are alternative ways of thinking about Christian political engagement that don't necessarily rely on getting a photo op with the President of the United States or voting in the right Supreme Court justices. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Zoom. What is the role of racial superiority in attracting the white evangelicals to Trump?
Yeah, I mentioned some of this. There's a long history here of white fear of racial integration, right? I could have gone on in the book. I go on and on about one of the in the South during the Civil War. You had slave rebellions that happened. You should read the diaries of some of these white planter class type people when a slave rebellion happens, or fears that their daughters are going to be raped by slaves or free blacks, right? There's a long history of this that I think is very, very easy for evangelicals today, white evangelicals today, to tap into. I'll say this. I think what happened in 2020, again, this is not answering why they turned to him in 2016, but I think in 2020, with the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd murders and so forth, again, I'm trying to think like a white evangelical. Some of it was just blatant racism, right? It all started, this book I'm working on is part of a 3-book series. The next part is about Obama. And I think it all started with Obama. The subtle racism that took place on email chain lists and all this kind of stuff that people would get, this was before social media. But, I think there's a certain part of the left that, when you tell a poor white evangelical, or someone who's lower, working class white evangelical who maybe father and grandfather and great grandfather were diehard Democrats, when you tell them that you have white privilege, they have white privilege, right? Some poor farmer trying to just make a living up in, Kansas somewhere says, what do you mean I have privilege? I haven't had privilege one day in my life. I've, busted my butt to and my family has worked this land for years and we never quite made it, right? So it's easy, I think, to see, again, I'm not advocating or not advocating anything here, but I think it's easy to see things like affirmative action and others. You see a lot of poor or lower working class white people who see advantages given to people of color, again, to address long-standing systemic racism, right? Don't get me wrong about that. But they see this as somehow not fair, right? And Trump was going to Trump championed that in many ways, right? And really exacerbated it. Now, in terms of immigration, I think take the historical examples that I mentioned. Nothing surprised me that Trump wanted to ban Muslims. Nothing surprised me historically, except for those first 2 babies. Remember when I said I didn't have my historian's hat on yet? But nothing surprised me that Trump is the champion of white America. So anytime people of color want to come in and, I don't think I don't know what he said. I've lost track, right? And poison, right? I don't know if he used that term or not, but he might as well have. Poison white culture and white, white dominance in the culture. That becomes a political tool for him. And again, it's the politics of fear there. He stokes fear. He digs into the worst fears that one might have about losing their country, and he exploits them. And race is one way that he does that, and probably the most effective way in which he does that.
Other questions?
If you write in a book now, how would you change it
Yeah.
in terms of the book that you wrote 7 years ago? What changes would you?
Well, I mentioned the one, right? I mean, I think, I talked to, I'm a historian, but I talk to, do sociological research with white evangelicals all the time. Nothing formally, just I know them, right? I speak with them a lot. I don't think anything. I think the arguments are all the same. I do think, hope, power of the fear, politics, nostalgia. I think they're all there. They've probably even been exacerbated to some degree since 2016. Now I would add a lot more things to the book. The book was published in 2018, so there's nothing in there about January 6th. There's nothing in there about the so-called stolen election, right? He wouldn't accept the results of the election. So I would sort of add things to that. But I think the thesis still holds to explain Trump voters, with that one caveat that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, that I do think I do think that, again, this is an analyst here. Sometimes I always have to, remind you of that. But I do think that Harris's embrace of a kind of cultural kind of liberalism, especially in relationship to the way she has placed the pro-choice movement as a dominant theme, but also LGBTQ rights, and all of these kind of things. I think that she does not become a viable candidate, in other words, for most white evangelicals. Yeah, I'm saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying I just don't think white evangelicals. I don't think she. I think Barack Obama, whatever you thought about him, Barack Obama was able to get 20 to 25% of white evangelicals to vote for him because he at least, I think, made some gestures to that, right? I mean, Barack Obama called abortion, for example, a horrible thing, but women still have the right to have it, and we need to think about ways to reduce abortions, right? Barack Obama went into Rick Warren's church and sat on that, the big mega church, right? Barack Obama went and spoke to the Sojourners group, right? Barack Obama came to Messiah College and spoke there at a Christian college where I was present for that. So Hillary was there too, by the way. It was during the Pennsylvania primary in 2016. I don't think Hillary or Harris had made any efforts. They're just assuming that group belongs to Trump, and they're going to run on that, right? So yeah, it's a little, take it for what it's worth, a little political pontificating here from, yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting point, though, because I hadn't really thought about that until you mentioned it.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting point, because you go back to the 60s and everybody was concerned when JFK, if he became president, the Pope would tell him how to run the White House. And then you had people with Romney worried about his Mormonism.
Yeah.
And it was not always subtle, and sometimes it was subtle.
Yeah.
But I hadn't really thought about it in terms of the Harris ticket. There's not any real explicit reference to religion.
The Harris ticket is she's a Baptist. The Harris, total analysis here, not opinion. The Harris ticket is doubling down on every kind of cultural issue that will make sure that every white evangelical vote. They don't seem to be seeking any common ground, on that point. Even just in the rhetoric. Like, they're never going to find common ground on policy and so forth, but at least Obama was able to reach across the aisle and rhetoric. I mean, there's think about this less in terms of the cultural issues and more in terms of kind of the white working class in America, right? I just saw that if you watch the GOP convention, the Teamsters, the president of the Teamsters spoke at the Republican National Convention, right? Sean O'Brien gave a speech, because there's so many members of the Teamsters who now are voting for Trump, right? Then, I don't know if you saw this in the news, but for the first time in I don't know how long, since the 90s, the Teamsters now are not endorsing either candidate, right? I mean, and I think it's because the Harris, and this is from a political strategy point of view, I think the Harris campaign has ignored much of those kind of, moderate working people who believe that, abortion might be wrong, marriage is between a man or a woman, but they're not against gay marriage, but they want to have some kind of pluralism, right? And I don't think you could develop a strong political coalition without that group. Those people who are working, my grandfather was a Teamster, and he was also a very conservative Catholic. But there's still remnants of those people. So again, I'm not sure. Those people, Harris has failed to do that, and those people are going to go straight to Trump. And a lot of them have already. Yeah.
So we have another question from online, and it is, has Trumpism effectively destroyed American Christianity?
Depends where you look, I guess, or how you define American Christianity. I think Trumpism has pretty much destroyed the very word evangelical as evangelical means the good news. Right? It's the good news of the gospel. Good news for the poor. Good news, of hope. That word is now associated with Trumpism. I think that's a shame, actually. But so I think rhetorically, I think it's destroyed that word. For me to answer that question would be to kind of suggest that what does destroying Christianity look like, right? What does, there is a strong resistance movement outside of evangelical Christianity to Trump. I'm guessing some of you here may represent that resistance movement. There is a small but strong and vocal resistant movement even within evangelicalism to Trump. But I think it's evangelical Christianity is now in a moment where whether it be the Southern Baptists and all of their kind of patriarchal kind of, stuff Kristen Gomez Dumais writes about, who's been here, I know, about the sexual abuse and the racism and the Trumpism and so forth. I think, and you're seeing the rise of nuns, right? NONES, people who don't have any faith at all, in anything. So, I think time will tell. I'll go back to the beginning of my talk and say, I'll punt and say, ask me in 20 years, right?
Question over here.
So I kind of have two questions. One is there a way to quantify the percentage of Christians that are considered evangelical?
Yeah.
And then the other question is, there's kind of like the other big politics, which is corporations.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people I talk to feel that it doesn't matter whether it's Trump or Harris, it's still the corporations running everything. So how do they benefit?
Well, as someone who, I'll take the second one first. As someone who, I'm on tape here, but I'll probably get in trouble in certain sectors. So, as someone who's sort of sympathetic to a socialist view of the world, let's put it that way, I have the same concern about corporations. I think every major political candidate has been in the pocket of major corporations, Democrat or Republican. Barack Obama has, Hillary, of course, the conservatives with their free market, principles. I think, Harris is as well, Kamala Harris. So, I do feel that we're in a capitalist society, and without going off on a sermon on that, I think, yes, I'll just say yes. I think corporations drive everything in this country, and we could have a debate about how that plays out, right, in everyday life in some ways. I mean, consumerism, materialism, the very idea of the selling of products essentially assumes that capitalism only works unless you meet those sort of basest lusts and needs for goods that a person has. I don't know how a society survives much that way. But the first question was about evangelicals, and politically, in terms of the political pollsters, right? An evangelical, the exit poll, is defined as somebody who either says they're an evangelical or says that they're a born-again Christian, right? If they say, what is your faith? If they say evangelical or born-again Christian, they count, right? Again, there's a debate going on right now within the scholarly world about just how to define an evangelical. And there would be some who would say, if we define evangelicals historically, then they are, one scholar has recently published a scholarly article suggesting that evangelical equal, at least post-World War II evangelical equals white, patriarch, racist, free market capitalist, who and Christian nationalist, right? There's a lot of truth to that definition. It's also pretty sweeping, right? And historically, I don't think some of it is accurate, but I think you need a little more complexity and nuance. It was published in a religion journal. That's the problem. It wasn't published in a historical journal. At least that's what I told the author. There's another way of defining evangelicals, which has been the dominant way since probably the 1980s. A historian by the name of David Bebbington produced something called the Bevington Quadrilateral, and it's 4 things, right? An evangelical is somebody, and you have to have all 4, right? An evangelical is somebody who believes in what he calls, I'm going to use these kind of terms that he uses, crucicentrism. In other words, the centrality of the cross, that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, right? So that you can go to heaven, right? Number 1. Number 2, biblicism, or the idea that the Bible is the inspired word of God. Some would even go further and say it's inerrant. It's it tells you things about science too, but you can still believe the Bible's inspired without it believing it's a science book. Number three, why am I blanking on the three? Crucicentrism, biblicism. I'm blanking on the third one, I'm sorry. But the fourth one is activism. In other words, going out and sharing the gospel, right? Witnessing or, preaching the gospel, street corners, tracts, accept Jesus as your savior, kind of thing. Oh, man, I can't believe I'm blanking on the third one, but it's something to do with the salvation piece, right? Conversionism, right? That you have a moment in your life when you're born again, right? You can point to when you were saved, right? Kind of thing. So if you embrace all four of those things, the scholarly consensus is that you would probably you would be defined as an evangelical. Yeah. So how many are there? Well, it fluctuates probably anywhere between 20 to 25% of the American electorate are white evangelicals, which is a significant chunk.
Okay, we have just a couple more questions online. And what is the role of racial superiority? Oh, no, did we already do that one?
It sounded familiar.
Yeah, I was going to say, using your historian's perspective of American political parties, how will populism continue to affect the political party dynamic?
I think this is the question, right? This is the big question. And again, I've said this 100 times, right? I'm a historian, not a prophet or prognosticator. But it seems pretty clear to me that there will be some aspect of populism, that conservative populism, that continues well after Trump is off the scene. I think, again, some of you might have kind of bristled for a second until I explained when I talked about Jerry Falwell should be in the history books more. Donald Trump is a signature political figure in American political history. There's no doubt about it. He'll be happy to tell you that too. But I mean, historians are going to be reckoning with this period for a long, long time about how a wealthy, rich real estate investor was able to win over the white working class and the white poor in the way that he was able to do, especially since by voting for him, most of them are kind of voting completely against their own interests, right? So that is conservative populism. I do think there was a moment there for a while where economic progressive populism in the campaign of Bernie Sanders and others also had its day. Right. One of the fascinating things about the 2016 election was just how much populism there was. Right. I mean, and if you could go full. If you really studied Trump and Sanders, they had a lot of similarities between them as people appealing to ordinary folks who feel exploited by a capitalist system. Right. So will there be a rise of economic or sort of progressive populism? That's hard to tell. I think Harris has not turned towards the kind of economic populism that Bernie Sanders embraced. She has turned towards, again, what I was talking about before, much more cultural kind of liberalism, right? With the cultural and social issues rather than the economic issues. So I would not call her a kind of true historical populist, like in the stream of like William Jennings Bryan in the 19th century, or people like that. But I think the conservative populism is not going away, and in fact, I think it's been around much longer than Trump. I think the success in the 1990s of people like Pat Buchanan, for example, who tapped into that working class populism. Trump obviously tapped into it. Of course, Trump is the Svengali, right? He's the, so it'll be interesting to see. I think there will be a form of populism. MAGA is not going away. Trump has kids. This scares me. It's not going away, but can it sustain the, so I look at real quick, I look at someone like J.D. Vance, right? Who is clearly a populist, right? A conservative populist in the kind of Trump idea. At least he became one in the last couple of years, right? Suddenly, right? After all the bad things he said about Trump previous. When I listen to J.D. Vance speak, I hear a populist in the raw. And what I mean by that is the darkness of this kind of conservative populism comes out in J.D. Vance because he doesn't have the, charisma or the presence of Trump. He's able to soften that, I think, a little bit among his followers, and even he's able to joke and he's a cartoon character, right? Donald Trump. Vance is just forget no kind of facade. No, I was on the Apprentice. I'm a celebrity. I'm Donald Trump. It's just raw with Vance, and I think that's why you see him. His cat lady comments and his appeal to these kinds of racist tropes and on and on. I think that's what the future of populism looks like after Trump is gone, if it manages to keep going.
Oh, I have one question over here.
Observation leading to questions.
Yeah.
With us being the first in the South, I, over the years, have gone to campaign speeches of many presidential
You mean
candidates.
South Carolina?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I went to a Trump rally in the, I guess before the 2016 election.
Yeah.
And I witnessed something I had never seen anywhere else. At one point, he looked out at the audience that was nowhere near as big as he quoted it was. And he said, "You're the smart ones." And people literally started jumping up and down in the room and yelling, "We're the smart ones."
That's the populace, right? I mean, that's the there's an assault right now. There's a great book called by Tom Nichols. He writes for the Atlantic. It's called The Death of Expertise. It's called. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. But there's a confusion right now in our culture between, well, maybe it's not that much of a division between the two, but there's the elites are the educated, right? I mean, now with social media, I can be on social media. I stopped engaging. I run a magazine called Current, where we post our articles on there, but I don't really engage them unless it's Mets, New York Mets stuff or Bruce Springsteen stuff. But I could go on there, having spent my entire life, adult life, studying evangelicalism, studying American history, and I'm equal. People don't care that I have PhD after like I have no expertise on there, and I'm treated as such, right? And I think that's what Trump taps into, these elites, these Ivy League people, right? These people who don't understand the heartland. They don't understand like good heartland values, Midwestern values, if you will, or Southern values.
Like Trump does?
Yeah, like Trump does, right? It's really interesting because I don't want to get off track, but I was teaching. I teach this course on colonial America. I was teaching Friday. I was teaching them about this event that happened in 17th century Virginia, known as Bacon's Rebellion. Somebody who know history might remember this. The story is real simple. You had a bunch of indentured servants who came over to work as white indentured servants who came over to work as laborers in the tobacco fields in the 1660s, 1670s in colonial Virginia. And then after their indentures were over, after 7 years, they were let go. They were free, right? And all of them settled in like the worst land, north of the James River. They were falls of the James River. They were poor. They couldn't grow anything. They had a lot of guns. They were bachelors. They were angry. They couldn't vote. These who are this, right? They were upset about, And then there was this guy Nathaniel Bacon, who was a wealthy member of the House of Burgesses who said, hey, I can gain political power by going out and leading them in a rebellion, right? Now, I don't bring the present to bear. I want my students to understand the 17th century on its own terms, right? But it's really, really hard not to like throw in a line there. It sounds familiar, right? But they're motivating these poor or working class or uneducated people to hate people with any kind of expertise because they're obviously part of the and now this, I mean, it's really getting out of control now with a certain I call it the hardcore motto wing of the evangelical movement. I'll talk about some of them in the second lecture actually tomorrow. People like Charlie Kirk and I don't know if these names even ring a bell to anybody, but who now are bringing about what we might call spiritual warfare version of politics, right? Not only are these elites they don't care about you, they're educated, they think they're smarter than you, right? But they're also working for Satan, right? They're working for again, that you're laughing at that, right? But there is an entire conservative Christian right media infrastructure that they're on YouTube channels. They're on, there's one guy, Lance Wall now, who actually 60 Minutes just did a story on him. It shows you how mainstream these people are becoming because Trump's lifted them in such a way. And this guy's got 1 million people on Facebook who listen to him every single day, right? So there is this entire, if you're living, and don't take this personally, but if you're living in a kind of left bubble, and only, and I tell this to the right, if you're living in a kind of left progressive bubble, and you're not engaged with this kind of stuff, this is the kind of stuff that's, or at least don't know about this kind of stuff. This is the stuff that is really scary, if you ask me, because these folks have massive funds. I saw it firsthand in Pennsylvania when Doug Mastriano, I don't know if that name rings a bell, ran for governor, Christian, right? Kind of Christian nationalist, ran for governor of Pennsylvania on the Republican ticket, and I saw all of these MAGA evangelicals, I'll call them, descend on Pennsylvania. And my county, the county where I live, it's kind of like being a progressive theologian in Anderson, South Carolina. My county, central Pennsylvania, you know the story, right? Pittsburgh, Philly, and Alabama in the middle. Right? My county, in Cumberland County, west of the Susquehanna River, went 79% for Trump, right? So I get it being a progressive in South Carolina. But I saw these people firsthand. So it's all, that's it. And they call themselves even Christian populists, right? They don't listen to the theologians who actually know something about or people who study how to do Christian politics, right? That's the populism that, I think is going to continue. I think Trump set the stage for that. It's going to be hard to overcome that.
We have a neighbor named Mark Robinson.
Yeah. Let's not even go there.
We have another question.
Is he still, let's look at the news. He's still, yeah. Okay. Hasn't given up to it.
Speaking of fear, I think that we never Trumpers are scared. Is today different, or is today unique in history, or is this just a part of the pattern of American history?
Both. And that's not a cop-out answer. I think that's true. And this is what I mean by both. I think Trump, as I've tried to lay out for you tonight, Trump is the natural result, at least for evangelical support, right? That's what I'm talking about, right? Trump is the natural result of the politics of fear by evangelicals, the politics of power, which emerges in the 1970s with the rise of the Christian right, and the politics of nostalgia. It leads directly to Trump. Now, again, I think the through line is what I talked about. I think there are other evangelical alternatives out there, but the through line is what I laid out from the election of 1800 today, all the way up to the present. Again, I'm painting with hugely broad brushes here because I realize it's, however much, a 40, 50-minute lecture. On the other hand, we've never seen anyone in American history like Trump. He's new. This is a new thing. No one has been as brazen. No one has been as populist and successful at being as populist. No one has been so disrespectful of American institutions to the degree of Trump. Now, whatever you think about Ronald Reagan, whatever you think about George H.W. Bush, Bob Dole, George W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, right? White evangelicals had always seen those people as people of good moral character who at least cared about American institutions, cared about American democracy, and so forth. Trump is the first time, I think, in which the character piece and the policy piece, they had a choice to make for the first time. And rather than choosing character, they chose policy, and they said, well, if Trump is, I don't care what Trump, I just want someone to fight for me. Right now, again, there are some people who say Trump came born again, and there's this prosperity preacher named Paula White who claims she led Trump to the Lord. But I think most evangelicals would admit that Trump does not carry kind of the virtues that a Christian should uphold, but he has the policies that they want, and they're willing to kind of make that Faustian bargain with Trump in order to get the policies that they want. And that goes back to the question about is Christianity, what was it, being destroyed or something? I think, historians talk about contingency, right? In other words, his history is about the choices, the roads that people take, right? The paths that people follow, the decisions that they make in time. If you make a decision this way, you're going to go this, the culture, your movement, your church, whatever, is going to go one way, versus if you take the other path, you're going to go another way. That's what history is. It's made up of these choices. We call that contingency. Everything is built contingent upon previous choices. Right. And that's this book I said I'm working on, Roads Not Taken, right? It's really a book about contingency. So, white evangelicals made a choice to prefer their policy issues, basically get Roe versus Wade overturned, get some Supreme Court justices, get the embassy in Jerusalem, get the Johnson Amendment overthrown so that they could endorse candidates in their pulpits, and so it was never overthrown, by the way. Trump tried. They chose that over character, over presidential character, and now we'll see how. I can't answer whether that destroyed Christianity, but in 20 years we'll see what the historians say about it. And again, it's all subjective anyway, right? Who's gonna if you talk to a Trump person, this is the greatest moment in the history of Christendom. What we're living through right now. Trump is King Cyrus. He's here to save the Israelites and send them back to the promised land after their Babylonian captivity under Barack Obama, right? I mean, they literally think he's King Cyrus. You've heard of him, right? He's a Cyrus-like figure, right? They even sell gold coins with Trump on one side and King Cyrus on the other. You can get one for $50 online. What was that?
There are 100.
Oh, 100? Okay. They must have gone up. Trump probably needs more money to pay his legal bills.
And the religious argument, there is that God can use anyone like a King Cyrus to accomplish the plan.
That's the argument, right? Yeah. Well, that clearly becomes the plan after you have to justify voting for Donald Trump. I've never heard, I studied the Christian right my entire life, and I've never heard them make that argument before. Where was that argument with any Democratic candidate since Carter? Now all of a sudden, politics shaping theology. Suddenly there's this new theological position. Or the other thing is, religious liberty, right? Yeah, I put it in quotes before when I said it. Christian right never talked about religious liberty as much as they did after Obergefell Hodges, the gay marriage decision, right? They never talked. Suddenly now they're talking about religious liberty all the time. It became an issue. So that's another whole other lecture, right? I could get about how politics, I'll actually talk about this a little bit tomorrow, how politics has shaped evangelical theology. I would say it's not just evangelicals. Historically, politics has shaped a lot. I mean, mainline Protestants were like, some of the most Christian nationalist people you could imagine in the 1950s. They were waving the flag in church. They were, I got a neighbor, I have a 93-year-old neighbor who, is a lifelong United Methodist, as conservative as can be, mainline Protestant, God and country, the flag, voted for Trump and so forth. So there are a lot of mainliners too, who especially in the 50s and 60s, who were uplifting this kind of Christian nation idea as well. But so we can also talk about how politics shaped or nationalism shaped their theology as well. I mean, I know that I realize that may not be about what progressive theologians want to hear, but that's what happens when you bring a historian in the room. Right? They start pointing out how the past unfolded, right?
So sorry, kind of a follow-up to this question. So I was so young, I don't remember, but the Red Scare, McCarthyism, is this a whole different level from that? I didn't live through those times.
It's similar. I mean, I'm not sure what I'll be the first one to kind of critique like comparisons. Like, for instance, I think there's a lot of similarities between like Trump and MAGA and fascism. I just don't think as a historian, I just kind of like, they're two very different, it's hard to yank fascism out of the 1930s and apply. It looks like something akin to that. So I'm always hesitant to make these kind of comparisons. But what do you have? I'm curious, what do you have in mind when you say that, when you say that this is like a new Red Scare? Like there's some sort of story, some kind of news?
The fear.
Huh? Oh yeah. Oh, in terms of the fear, yeah. I think you get through line. I think the through line is there definitely. I don't talk about it in the book, but I probably could. With fear of fear of communism, and that's the other thing, right? Without the Soviet Union around anymore, people are by nature fearful, I think, and they need to find fear in other things, right? Now that the great threat is gone. Yeah.
Okay. If we don't have any other questions for tonight, remember we will see Dr. Fee again tomorrow. Before we wrap up, I do want to mention for those of you who are in person, we do have an envelope. If you want to make a contribution to help us bring wonderful speakers like Dr. Fee in, please drop something in that envelope. Or for those of you online, you can make a donation at afptonline.org, and you can donate there. And that way we can continue to bring great speakers like this.